Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandra Williams. I'm the state senator for the 21st Senate District, and I want to thank you for joining me tonight for the Ohio Transportation Budget Update, which is currently in the Ohio Senate Transportation Committee. I am a member of that committee, along with my colleague, Senator Nickie, who represents the 23rd Senate District in Ohio, which is Lakewood, the city of Cleveland, and some other areas in Cuyahoga County. I also have with me Jessica Wallace. Jessica Wallace is a RTA rider, and she's going to share with us some of her experiences with RTA and how the budget that we are working on right now will impact her. We have a very special guest as well as Jessica, because she's a very special guest. We have the CEO of the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority, India Birdsong. She's going to be joining us hopefully in a few minutes. She's having a little bit of technical difficulty. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I wanted to first give you guys an update on what we are working on. Now, I told you about the transportation budget, but I wanted to also tell you what goes into that transportation budget. We fund the highway patrol. We fund the funds for infrastructure for highway construction. So let's start with that. ODOT's budget is a $5.89 billion budget over the biennium. And in that budget, we fund construction projects for our highways, bridges, and local infrastructure. And our local regional department that deals with that is NOACA. So let me break down to you how we fund those projects. 47.7% of the dollars that we provide in the transportation budget for highway construction comes from the federal government. 44.6% of those dollars come from the state government. 2.7% of those dollars come from the local government, and 2.7% comes from state and local bonds. Now, again, I said that makes up $5.89 billion over the biennium. So it's a lot of money that we will be appropriating. This budget has to be passed by our Constitution by March 31st of this year. So we are at a crunch time right now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Now, let's break down where some of the state money comes from. When you go to the gas station and you buy a gallon of gas, you are helping to fund the Ohio transportation budget. That budget and that part is the highway construction. So every time you are riding on the freeway or riding on our streets in the Northeast Ohio area, your dollars are paying for it every time you go to the gas station. So let me give you a breakdown. When you go to the gas station, you pay a tax of 0.38%. 38.5 cents you're charged when you go to the gas station every time you get a gallon of gas. If you are buying compressed natural gas, you are paying 20 cents extra as a tax when you get a gas of gasoline. And if you're buying diesel, you pay 47 cents. So when you go to the gas station, you're not just paying to receive the gas, you're paying to send money back to the state legislature so that we can fund the transportation infrastructure bill, which I just discussed. You also have, beyond the state taxes, you have a federal tax of 18.4 cents. So you're paying 38.5 cents to the state government if you have regular gas. You're paying 20 cents if you're getting CNG. You're paying 47 cents if you are buying diesel, and the federal government on top of that has you paying 18.40 cents. So that is our infrastructure budget. Of those dollars that I just outlined for you, 55% of all those dollars stay with ODOT, the Ohio Department of Transportation. 45% of those dollars go back to local governments, and in our case, it's NOACA, and they use that money for whatever projects they deem necessary. So that is our infrastructure budget. But today we are here because we wanted to focus on public transit, and that's been the hot topic for a lot of people over the years. Now, I wanted to give you the funding sources, and I know this might be going a little deep for people, but I think it's important for you to know where all these dollars come from. So for our transportation budget, which is a total of $196.67 million. That is how much the state has right now for transportation. $196 million over the next 2 years. That money comes from federal pass-through funds from the federal government. So the federal government is giving us $40.2 million every fiscal year. So that's fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 from the federal government. The second earmark comes from the federal government through federal highway flex dollars. And that is a total of $33 million. And that can be used for capital projects for ODOT. And then finally, it is right now $23.15 million from the state of Ohio. And that's where a lot of the controversy is coming in right now. Let's talk about the as introduced version of the budget. When the governor introduced his budget, he allocated $7 million for the entire year for public transit from the state of Ohio. Now, most experts, most people who deal with this, the issue of transportation, believe that that is not sufficient to address the transportation needs of the residents of the state of Ohio. To put it in perspective, 2 years ago when we passed the transportation budget, we allocated $70 million per year for public transit. So we went from $70 million a year for public transit for the entire state, not just for one region, but for the entire state, to $7 million for the entire state per year. So that's what we want to talk about today, and talk about what the impact of a 90% cut in state funding for public transit will mean to riders here in the state of Ohio. I do have some good news though. The House of Representatives, when they passed their budget last week, they were able to increase the state's allocation from $7 million to $23.15 million per year. It is a good increase, but it is not the amount of money we need to service all of the needs from the riders within our community. So I wanted to start there. I also want to talk to the director, the CEO of the Greater Cleveland RTA to talk about track funding. The Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority was in our transportation committee last week, and they talked about track funding. Track funding is used to expand some of our current roads and other things. RTA is currently using track funding to improve the rails for our rapid transit, our rapid system in Cleveland. We're the only area in the state of Ohio that actually has a rapid. And so right now, RTA is replacing the tracks that the rapid goes on, but they don't have enough funding for the actual cars, and the cars and the railing is out of date. And so Senator Antonio I and others from Northeast Ohio will be asking for an amendment to allow the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority to apply for track funding to buy new buses, not buses, but rail cars for the Greater Cleveland RTA. And I do see now Jose Feliciano coming on. So Jose, are you here to take the place of our CEO? Okay, India is actually joining now. So if we can just hold a minute, we will be right there. Nickie, would you like to add anything in, or Senator Antonio, before the CEO gets here?
No, I just want to say that was a wonderful summary of our budget, and just what I look forward to talking a little bit about the process after we hear from Director Birdsong from RTA. But it is it's a lot of money for sure, and I thought that my favorite part of what you've mentioned so far is just to let people know that that tax at the gas pump is actually paying for us to be able to repair and keep safe our roads and bridges. I think that's really important, and that's great. But one of the areas that has been incredibly important, but not always a priority in Ohio in terms of the way we fund it, is public transportation. And Senator Williams and I have been pushing for a long time to increase those dollars for sure. I think we have an opportunity with this budget to be able to do that.
Yeah. I also want to let you know, Senator Antonio, you brought up something that I didn't mention. The federal flex dollars, as I said, goes for the infrastructure on our highways and bridges, our streets in our communities. But one of the requests that the NOACA agency and others have been asking for is to allow them to use federal flex dollars to go to RTA to help with some of the needed dollars they need for operating or infrastructure. Secondly, we are proposing, I actually proposed this in a bill last General Assembly, and we are proposing it again this year, to change the funding structure so that the city of Cleveland and all the other major cities get money back from this budget based on vehicle miles traveled. We all know that in some of our bigger urban communities, we have a lot of people who are coming into our regions from all parts of the state to go to work or to go shopping or whatever the case may be. And we know, I have the breakdown in numbers here, that in our area, most of the urban areas have more cars on their roads. And so the experts believe that we should be returning the money to the local communities based on how many cars have been using their roads. And simply being, if more cars are on our roads, then we're going to have more infrastructure or more repairs that need to be made. So why don't we get more dollars back from the state budget, because we're handling more volume than most people are. So I see our CEO is joining us now. So I wanted to really take a moment and just give you a little bit about her background before her entry is complete. India Birdsong serves as the CEO and General Manager of the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority. She joined RTA in September of 2019 and brings nearly 15 years of experience working in positions of increasing responsibility in the public transit industry. She began her career in 2006 when she joined the Central Region for the Chicago Transit Authority, where she served in planning, operations, and finally as Senior Manager of Bus Supervision and Instruction. She was appointed in 2016 as the Chief Operating Officer of We Go Public Transit in Nashville, where she served until she came to the Cleveland area. We are lucky to have Ms. Birdsong here joining us to take our regional transit system to the next level. We know for a fact that she has been doing a great job so far, and I cannot wait to hear what she is going to be doing next. And as I said that, we've had another technical difficulty. So Nickie, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's at stake in this budget and what the process is going to be. As I said earlier, Nickie Antonio serves as the ranking Democrat on the committee. She has been serving on Transportation Committee as well as the whole Finance Committee for years now. And why don't you take it away from there, Nickie?
Okay, and now I'll keep an eye out for Director Birdsong to come back. So basically where we're at right now is we've been hearing folks come and testify. We're going to continue to hear that this next week. And we have already offered some amendments. As Senator Williams pointed out, one of the things that when we first got this budget from the administration, they had taken the funding for public transit from 70 million last General Assembly down to 7 million when the budget was introduced by the administration. Well, our friends in the House agreed with those of us in the Senate, said that it's not enough money to really support public transportation. Public transit needs to be a priority in the state of Ohio. And so the House amended the budget, and as Senator Williams said, put 23 million per year back in. We're hoping to increase and to really go back to the 70 million that was there in the last budget, the last time we went through, because we know how much public transportation is needed, both in rural and urban areas. I mean, all over the state, this is an important issue for folks. So that's at the heart, I think, of this budget. We also want to make sure that we can fix our roads and bridges. And in Cuyahoga County, as Senator Williams pointed out, we're going to be very much working across the aisle to try to get agreements to find some of that funding to be able to replace the track for the rapid line, but also those cars, which are in very much need of replacement as time goes on, and they're incredibly expensive. But did you know that really the rapid line is the most important and the only rail line that we have, a passenger rail line that's a commuter rail in the state of Ohio, that it's the only one. So it's kind of unique and very cool that we can offer this for folks. There were some other things in the budget about distracted driving, trying to get the folks who have electric vehicles to pay a little bit towards, because think about it, they're not paying a gas tax, right? To keep our roads and bridges maintained. So we're working on that and trying to figure out how to also edit those kinds of things and add a little bit to it so they can actually participate in supporting the roads and bridges funding, but at a level that makes sense for them, because we're also trying to encourage people. We want to see people buying electric vehicles because they're good for the environment. It's probably the way we're going to go in the future. It looks like Miss Birdsong is back on, so I'm going to stop there, Senator, and see if we can't bring her into the conversation.
Definitely. And before we do that, what I want to make sure I offer is an opportunity for everyone in the state of Ohio, in our region, to submit written testimony, to come down to the city, to the State House, to send your testimony via email to the chair of the committee, which is Senator Kunze. Her office and my office, as well as Senator Antonio's office, can help you get your testimony together. But what we really need to do is hear from those of you who have a concern and an interest, whether you are a company who has a problem getting your employees to work every day because they live so far away from where they work, or whether you are one of those riders like Jessica who depend on public transit to come down. So please submit testimony to us. We will drop in the chat box the information on how to submit your testimony, but it's going to be moving really quickly. So please send testimony down. So with that being said, CEO Birdsong, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Thank you so much for having me. I apologize for the glitch in the technology, but I am on audio, so I can hear everyone clearly. I just can't see you.
Well, you know what? That's okay. We saw you for a minute and we saw your beautiful face, and we were happy that you graced us that way for a minute. I really do appreciate you being here because this is a very important subject for so many people within our region. And I know that you deal with this every day, in and out. And I guess the first question I would have for you is, oh, and let me thank you for sending one of your executives down last week to testify. His testimony was awesome and he was able to answer the questions very well. So thank you for that.
That was Mike Shipper. Yeah.
My apologies for not having your name in front of me. So Mr. Shipper, thank you for that. The first question I have for you is, we talked about going from $70 million a year in the last transportation budget to $7 million a year. We know that the House of Representatives were able to get those numbers up to 23 million, but we're still short. That was a 90% cut that the governor offered in his as introduced version of the bill. So please tell me, if we do provide a 90% cut to state funding for public transportation, what would that look like for RTA? How would that impact you?
Absolutely. So, Senator, I appreciate you for inviting us today, and I absolutely will pass along your sentiments to Mr. Shipper. He actually is dialed in as well. So that was our Deputy General Manager for Engineering and Development. So we appreciate that. To answer your question, or to address your question regarding the budget cut proposal, it really is detrimental to us as an overall agency, and I'd say really the state and the industry, really. It's a blow to our planning process. So if you're looking at 70 million and automatically drop down to 7, it really inhibits our ability to move forward with planning for state of good repair projects, for capital projects and expenditures, and really making the system more customer friendly, as well as making sure that folks feel comfortable and safe on our system, especially because in Cleveland, we really have some of the oldest infrastructure in the state, and I dare say the country, for some of our equipment, such as the rail car. We definitely are looking at how to be more innovative in our approach as far as how to kind of compete with the car and how to compete with third-party vendors in a good way, in a positive way. When I say competition, such as Lyft and Uber and all of those kind of rideshare programs that were coming out pre-COVID, we really want to think about how we can look more attractive to our potential ridership and the community members that rely on us every day. So when we're looking at a 90% cut, it really takes us backwards, to be quite honest with you, as far as being able to procure good stations, to be able to work on locations that are transit-oriented development sites, our ability to really provide that quality service that I think the Cleveland community is looking for, and really the state is looking for as well. As the largest entity in Ohio for public transit, we do typically get the lion's share of that funding. So when you actually look at that kind of cut, there's no way that we can make up for that gap easily or readily when we're thinking about processing these projects that really are still investment in our communities, especially communities of color and communities that are low to mid income that depend on these services. So it definitely was a blow to us, and I think that that's why we're rallying so hard and so emphatically to make sure people understand that this is a necessary component to our budget structure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Listen, when we first heard about the budget, I had a conversation with our majority leadership here and the governor's office, and their rationale for cutting the funding was that you all got all of the regional transit authorities across the state received over 700 or almost $700 million in COVID-19 funding. Can you share with the listeners what you actually did with that money and what it could be used for?
Sure, I think that's a fair question, and we've actually been asked it quite a bit over the last few weeks. We at RTA received in the first round of funding and stimulus kind of package for the COVID response, we got about $112 million in that first round of CARES Act funding. So if you're looking at $112 million, that sounds like a huge number, and it's a very sizable amount. However, we were specifically instructed, as were a lot of different agencies across the country, to utilize that money for reimbursement for operational activities in response to COVID. So what we did was we used that funding to make sure that we didn't have any layoffs. We haven't had any major cuts to service. In fact, we operated at our worst, right, at 85% of pre-COVID levels. We're at 93% now. And we also utilized that money to be able to invest in disinfecting technologies. We've invested in a lot of technologies that are utilized on aircraft as well as hospitals. so that we make sure that we can keep the service running and the buses and the trains on the street. Like I mentioned, we have not had any major layoffs, no major cuts, no furloughs. And then we also are using it to stabilize ourselves over the next foreseeable year or two operationally, because we have seen a reduction of about 50% in ridership. Folks are staying at home. They're coming on our service when it's essential only. And we appreciate that. It's allowed us to actually have really low numbers as far as the reported cases in RTA, as far as the RTA family goes. We actually stayed in the 30s for reported cases out of a staff of 2,300 well into October of last year through the pandemic. We're somewhere closer to around 190 now because, of course, we've had about a year of COVID and things have spiked around the holidays. But that money is not applicable to capital projects. So we still have a backlog of about $514 million worth of projects that need to be addressed. And it has been recommended that we look at flex funds and also look at other grant opportunities that may be out there in order to help us through that. But the CARES Act funding is specifically for operational needs in response to COVID, and we absolutely have drawn down on all of those dollars. And without that, we would be in a dire situation, but it in no way replaces the state funding for capital.
That's great. Well, I will say this, the House did a pretty good job at improving the governor's budget. When the budget was introduced, the governor's office was not in favor of allowing the regional transit authorities to use flex funding. But we did find out that they earmarked $33 million each fiscal year for entities like yours to use those flex dollars. And it's an 80-20 match. So you can 80% from the flex funds and 20% match from the local authorities. How will that help you in what you're trying to achieve?
I think it will help. It will help get us closer to our goal. But again, we have such a large gap between where we are and where we need to be on the capital side that we really are looking at how the state can provide a almost guaranteed, right, the commitment to serving public transit in the greater Cleveland area and really throughout Ohio. The problem that we run into is that when we don't have a dedicated funding source, there's been a lot of conversations about referendums and tax and how we're going to be able to get to that point. It's very difficult to be able to plan out a project that spans more than a year. And if you look at the average, I'll just give you an example. If you look at the average time frame on purchasing a transit vehicle, and I'm talking about like a 40-footer, bus transit vehicle, you usually are looking at a minimum of 18 months. And I'm talking about from the procurement time that you place the order to when it's actually on the road. So essentially almost none of our procurement takes less than a year. So if you're going to look at the time frame it takes to talk about a budget cycle, we really have to have budgets that are guaranteed or at least have a dedicated placeholder of more than a year, probably preferably 2 to 5 years, in order for us to actually plan accordingly. Otherwise, we really are functioning hand to mouth, which is a huge disservice to our customers and also to our ability to be able to be more innovative in our purchases.
And I want to jump in here right now. I really appreciate that you brought up that dedicated line. It's something we've been trying. Those of us in our Democratic caucus have been trying to get a dedicated line for public transportation for many years, and we've looked at that. Somebody in the chat asked a question about, is it helpful to look at states around us that actually really invest in much higher levels in their public transit, and can we use that as a rationale for Ohio spending more money? We've been bringing it up and trying to make that comparison, but unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be something that is accepted as a reason why Ohio spends at such a low level. India, do you want to address that? Because I know that issue comes up so much.
Absolutely. Sure, I would love to address that. First, I think you are absolutely correct. in your analysis. We've got to be able to look outside of ourselves to be able to think about good and effective mechanisms to fund public transit. I am not a native Clevelander. However, I am a native Midwesterner. So I have worked in a few other agencies throughout the country. Most recently, I did immigrate here from Nashville, Tennessee, where we actually had a referendum. It did not pass due to other circumstances. However, we had some pretty stiff competition, and I think that was good, right? So in that particular area, for example, having a referendum for public transit in the South is pretty rare. And so it's a good opportunity to get the exposure. And normally most referendums take about 2 or 3 tries at the ballot before they're successful. So the odds of that happening on the first try were a little slim, but we took the swing. I do think that having worked with other transit agencies that are in the Midwest and of course being active in other agencies on the East Coast, it is almost a given that kind of investment financially is just essential to good business. I do think that culture such as Ohio that is very car-centric and car-dependent really has a lot to do with the topography of the city and the topography of the state, where if you have rural versus urban, and you have those kind of battles and conversations where you look at the majority of the geography that may sway one way versus the other, I think you really have to take a look at the connectivity that public transit can bring. There's been a lot of conversations locally here in Cleveland about Hyperloop, and being able to connect regionally with other transportation agencies. Also fare collection activities and how we're going to potentially connect with other, local transit agencies of all sizes. And then be able to actually utilize our rail in the most effective way when we're looking at bus service redesign. So all of those things, I think, go into what might be attractive at the ballot for a referendum. But one thing I will say, and I've had this conversation with many senators and representatives like those of you on the call today, is that we've got to be able to prepare ourselves, meaning transportation, to compete at the ballot with very deserving essential services. So if you've got something on the ballot that pertains to education, police and fire, EMS, those are all absolutely worthy causes to be able to find public dollars. So transportation has to be in the best possible situation to prove itself worthy of those public dollars coming out of the residents' pockets. And in order to get to that point, I'm a strong believer that we have to invest in ourselves right away in order to get to a state of good repair, to show that we actually have a product that could win over voters and would sustain the investment over time. So I think it's a chicken and egg conversation where we have to kind of do things simultaneously and be able to dedicate a respectable amount of funding every year so that these transit agencies such as RTA can actually get to the point of state of good repair where we're comfortable enough to provide a service that does not raise the eyebrow when we go to the ballot and have to be able to compete against these other essential services. But we have to prepare ourselves for that reality, and hopefully we can do that soon.
Thank you so much for that question. What we've been given so far is an amount of $150 million a year. Mike, I'm not sure if you brought that up in your testimony or not, but some of the testimony that has come in said that we need a dedicated line item of about $150 million a year to make us equal to or competitive with some of the other states across America. Mike or India, can you speak to that?
I think that, I'm not sure if Mike is on the line. I think that might have been Mike's testimony.
I'm on the line now. Actually,
okay,
I will speak to that. When we refer to the Ohio Transit Needs Study that was conducted and completed in 2015, that study made a recommendation that the state of Ohio should at a minimum be a 10% contributor towards transit funding. Not saying that that's the right amount or whatever, but at 10%, that would be over 100 million. And that was from a study that's now, 5 to 6 years old. Regarding some of the other states, you know, the Ohio, when you look at it on a per capita basis, the only state adjacent to us that has a lower funding level is Kentucky. Michigan actually funds transit at like $30 per capita. They fund $300 million in Michigan. Yeah, it's significantly different. Michigan also handled the MCO tax differently. They actually expanded the tax, where Ohio retracted it. Indiana is, because I have the data here, they're about $10 per person. So that would be in that 100 to 110 million if Ohio was close to Indiana. So, you know, those are two examples. Pennsylvania is way up there. That's way up and beyond, because they've, the way their state is set up, they've had a significant legislative push, you know, to fund Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So the state of Pennsylvania is, you know, one of the highest funders in the country. But you know, Indiana and Michigan are two pretty good examples. And certainly when we were testifying with the Ohio Transit, you know, Public Transit Association, you know, 2 years ago, we went from 40 to 70. If we went from 70 to 100, you know, we can gradually work our way up to being at that 10% level of all transit funding. And then maybe we can have a further discussion about what is the right level.
Right. Well, thanks, Mike, for that answer. I know CEO Birdsong has another Zoom call or meeting to get on, but I wanted to offer you an opportunity to give us some closing remarks before you leave.
Sure, I'll go ahead and go first. I would just say if anyone could take anything away from the conversation that you have tonight, just ponder and think about how life might be without public transportation. And I say that because I really wanted to really think about how best to serve our city and how best to serve our essential workers. It's not only the nurses and doctors that are taking us through the pandemic, for example. It's the grocery store clerks, you know, it's the janitors, it's the teachers, it's the folks that are showing up every day who really rely on public transit to get them to and from their destinations. And in order to really show the investment in those communities, I think we have to start with mobility and access, and that absolutely is underscored by public transit. So I do appreciate the time that you've afforded us tonight, and I do hope that we can continue the fight and being able to prove just how essential we are.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for being here again. I do appreciate it, and I do respect your time, so I'm going to let you go. But I should have started out by saying thank you to those first line workers, like the people who work at the regional transit authorities. I have several friends who actually work there, so I probably will hear it after this meeting is over. But they are great, and they have been doing a great job keeping people going and getting to where they need to go. So thank you all for the work that you are doing, and thank you for being a partner with us in trying to improve Ohio's transportation system.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome. Before you go, Mike, I want to talk about the track funding. And we've been talking about this for a while. I had another meeting yesterday with ODOT about that track funding. Can you share with us what you can use those track dollars for and what you want to use those dollars for?
Yes, Senator. You know, we are blessed with the rail system in Cleveland, and we've had it for a long time. But that rail system, the rail cars on our rail system are now 36 and 39 years old. And the true useful life of a rail car is about 31 years. So they are, it's a testament to how we've taken care of them, that they're lasting, but they are getting on their last legs, and they're becoming much less reliable. So we need to replace them. We have a program to replace all the rail cars over a number of years. It's a $300 million program, and we actually have identified 139 million of that funding. So RTA for the last 5 or 6 years has been putting $5 to $6 million aside. We've won a number of grants through NOACA, through the USDOT for a build grant. We did receive some state of Ohio funding 2 years ago for $5 million. We also have some federal grant funds that we've allocated to the program. But the track funding, we would, it's our wish that just like with the Healthline bus rapid transit we did a dozen years ago, track was a major funder of that. So we're looking for the state of Ohio and track to be a 25% participant in the rail car replacement program. So that's, on the state side, we still need $70 million. And one of the issues that when we attempted to do that, there was an issue on eligibility, and we're trying to overcome that. So I think we've talked to the Northeast Ohio delegation, yourselves. We've had the state Senate president come visit our rail shop. We had a number of House members who have made some attempts to just have a slight change in the track eligibility that would allow the rail cars to be eligible as a replacement. And so that's what we're looking to do.
And Mike, I wanna jump in here, and we're having those. We're continuing to have the conversations here in the with the committee and with the leadership, and we're hoping that we might be able to introduce some amendments. One key one that I'm hoping Sandra, Senator Williams, is going to be introducing, and I'm going to carry the paper because we're trying to do everything we can to make sure that goes there. So I think that will go a long way. I did want to address a couple of people have asked some questions. Mitzi Wagner, who lives in my district, has been asking the question about how are we talking to employers. We know, and I know we're going to hear from Jessica in a minute because she's a transit rider, but how do we advocate for those folks that use public transportation to get there to their jobs, to get, to just get everywhere? And are we engaging local employers? I know we've talked about a number of ways that we work with employers. And Mike, very quickly, if you want to address any of the work that's being done with employers to really get them in the mix, maybe that would be helpful.
Well, there are a couple things. I mean, we have a commuter advantage program that is set up through employers where the employees can get a RTA monthly pass at what would be a pre-tax rate. So it's about a 30% discount. And we have, I think, over 600 employers in the area that are part of that program. So the commuter advantage program is one way. We also have, so that's probably the best for people on for monthly. One thing that we've been trying to outreach with some of our employers or some of our developers in town is that that at some point, if you're developing a site, people actually have to work there. And if you're developing that site and you want, depending on what your pay scales are, but if you want employees to get there, employees that may not have cars or maybe in households that only have one car, they need to be on a transit line. So we've had some successes and some failures in that. When we did, years ago, when I can probably give a couple examples, but when Legacy Village was developed on the east side of Cleveland, the developer there totally ignored us and did not want to accommodate any transit utilization. About 2 weeks after they opened, he came calling to us saying, oh my God, all the employees are taking my parking spaces. Okay. So, you know, we tried to work with them and carve out a couple places, but because they had developed the pavement in there only for cars and not our buses, we couldn't bring our buses in there. In his next development, which was Steelyard Commons, as he was laying it out, he came back to us and said, okay, how do we get the buses in there? And how do we do it in a way? So we laid out a bus routing, and he put stronger pavement in there with bus stops so that we could actually transport employees and customers there. So, you know, we try to do those things. Some of the developers will listen, some won't. I think that's a good example of one that didn't and changed their mind. Same thing happened at Crocker Park. The developer there, we approached them. They said, yeah. And we actually have one roadway path through Crocker Park that can accommodate our buses. And it was a very slight change to their development, but it accommodated the turning movements of the buses, and we were able to get some shelters in there. So that way their employees, you know, could use the bus to get there. So
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike.
Well, Mike, that was good. That was really good. But I'm wondering, maybe when they thought about the buses originally, maybe they didn't want the people who had to take the buses, who might be out there shopping, coming to their location to shop. And then they realized the people who were going to work those jobs, very good people, actually had transportation issues themselves. You know, we talk about that a lot. It's not a part of this subject, but who do you want servicing or coming to patronizing your businesses?
Right.
So with the comments that you had, I want to make sure we bring in Jessica Wallace. Jessica is an advocate for the public transit system, and she has been great helping us to organize people, to talk about what the transportation budget means to her, as well as what the Greater Cleveland RTA has been able to do to assist her in her needs. So Jessica, tell us about you and your RTA needs.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here this evening and providing me the opportunity to share my story that notes the importance of funding public transit. I am a disability and accessibility advocate who has been dependent upon the Greater Cleveland RTA for nearly 16 years. I rely on a wheelchair for mobility, and driving is not something I have ever wanted to pursue, mainly due to the extreme costs involved in adapting and maintaining an accessible vehicle. I grew up in Geneva, Ohio, which is in Ashtabula County, where there was very limited public transportation service available. After high school, I began taking college courses at Kent State University's Ashtabula campus, but would rely on my parents to drive me back and forth, sometimes requiring multiple trips in one day due to my class schedule. In 2002, I transferred here to Case Western Reserve University, and it was during that time that I was first introduced to RTA. But growing up in a world and a community where very little was accessible, I initially wrongfully assumed that I would not be able to ride any of the buses or trains. So I never even attempted to do so until one day my roommate told me that she saw a person in a wheelchair board a bus and explained that a ramp would fold down, enabling the person to get on. I was a little skeptical about this, but I decided to give it a try myself. And sure enough, there I was on what at that time was known as the 6, heading to downtown Cleveland all by myself. And this was my first completely independent trip I've ever taken. And that day completely changed my life. Because up until that point, I hadn't quite figured out how I was going to navigate through life after college graduation. How would I get back and forth to work? Would I have to continue depending on my parents? If so, how would I ever be able to live independently? But as I rode that bus for the first time, all of those questions I'd long had were finally answered. And I realized that if I wanted to obtain my goal of living independently, I would need to rely on public transportation. And therefore, Cleveland was where I was meant to be. So upon graduating, I began looking for a job in downtown Cleveland, and in July of 2005, I achieved my goal of independence when I landed a new job downtown and an apartment in Cleveland, all within 1 week. So truly, without RTA, this achievement would not have been possible because I rely on the train and sometimes during the winter, the paratransit service to get back and forth to work. I depend on the buses to get me to doctor's appointments, to the stores, and to activities of entertainment that I enjoy, particularly visiting the museums and university circle where I am a member. So throughout the last 15 years, now going on 16 as a daily writer, I've become an advocate not only for myself, but also for other writers with accessibility needs. When I first moved to Cleveland, the Shaker Square Rapid Station that I now depend on was not yet accessible. Within a year or two, mechanical lifts were installed, but they were very unreliable. So I pushed for many years for ramps to be installed instead. And I am so grateful that last year, this dream finally came true. Many more rapid stops on the blue and green lines are becoming more accessible in this way, thus significantly expanding my available options when planning the trips I need to take throughout the city. The continued funding of these accommodations is absolutely essential for my livelihood. And I've been able to develop a network of family in the staff, in the operators, and the supervisors of RTA. So many individuals have gone above and beyond to help to make sure my experience as a writer have been good and safe ones. And I simply cannot stress enough that it is solely because of RTA, one of the best accessible transportation systems in the country, that I am able to maintain my independence and live the life that I had always dreamed of living. Thank you.
Wow, Jessica, you really summed it up for everybody. I think kudos
Thank
goes
you.
to the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority for giving you what you needed to be independent in our community. And there are so many others like you. We have so many people who have been commenting on what we have been talking about here today. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Pinky Butts, who is a member of our district. She has been an advocate for a very long time. Her question, and that question also came from Senator Councilwoman Santana, was about the homeless population. Mike, can you talk a little bit about the homeless population and how they are served with the Regional Transit Authority? And then can you talk a little bit about the shelters that, and if you don't have the answer, we can get that answer to people, you know, during our next meeting. But a lot of people have been talking about the shelters that have been removed from, I guess, where the bus stops are.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to talk too much on the homeless.
Really talk a little bit. I can give a little bit of an answer only because I'm a little bit closer connected and aware of some of the things that are going on, especially during COVID.
Yeah.
Which is that I I won't speak to the bus shelters because I'm not sure about that, but I can tell you that anecdotally, what I have heard is that folks who are going through the rapid stations, sometimes they take a little bit extra time to warm up. They've been able to do that. And actually, RTA has been very welcoming to folks understanding that they need to get out of the cold and they need a place to just kind of take some time. And so that has been something that's been possible. Many of the folks who ordinarily would be living out on the streets during COVID because of the need to have everybody off the streets, especially during the cold times, are staying in hotels. And many of the organizations like the Northeast Ohio Coalition for the Homeless and some of the other organizations that reach out to homeless folks or folks experiencing homelessness, while they're working with them on trying to find them housing and programs and get them plugged in, they also do have bus tickets that they're able to share with folks, especially when people are trying to get to a shelter at night or to a hotel at night, or get to a place to get a meal, but then get back where they need, or go to, a doctor's appointment or something. And so I know that the organizations have been able to access them. Now we've talked, and I'll just, I thank Reverend Pinckney Butts for this question, because I've long been an advocate that hopefully RTA would be able to figure out in the long run how to provide some passes for folks, especially when they're in the in some of the rapid housing programs. Some of the folks who are working on trying to get back to jobs or whatever, that there may be some places where they could access a pass. And I know that's something that we'll continue to work on. I wanted to say real quick too, there was another question about all this money that's coming, much like the CARES Act, the money in this new fund that we're just hearing about that's coming to local governments. The thing we have to remember about this is it's one-time only money. And part of what Senator Williams and I, and those of us involved with the transportation budget, and as Mike's come in RTA and has come in and testified, we need a sustainable long-term plan and commitments over the years to be able to really have a system that works for everybody. So Jessica's story, which is awesome, by the way, is the rule, not the exception, and that more people can take advantage of it. Somebody asked about folks who from the disability community, and as Jessica pointed out, folks really depend on public transportation for their independence. And so I think there's a lot there, but we need that long-term. If we get one-time money, and I know RTA was able to use some of that one-time money to make some purchases and replace some buses, but in the long run, for sustainability, we need a long-term plan. Thanks.
Thanks, Nickie. I appreciate that. Would you please, Mike, talk a little bit about how people can advocate for more shelters?
Yeah, I'm not sure about a specific location, but what we do is we actually have a shelter policy that, if a stop has over 50 people, it's eligible for a shelter. So, one of the things that's kind of thrown things out of whack during this past year is that, our ridership is down 50%. And so a lot of our locations aren't as used as much as they used to be. And certainly that was some of the issues with downtown. And I think, as our ridership comes back, we are always looking at various requests that come from, all parts of our community on whether it's putting a shelter where there isn't one, or improving the waiting area where there is a shelter. So there are a number of locations in the community where we may have a signpost that's in, you know, in a tree lawn.
Mhm.
Well, you know, that's not really even a stop like that's not very good stop, you know, especially if you're standing in the mud or whatever. So we're always looking at that. One thing that is happening is we're doing a system redesign right now, and that system redesign is going to be rolled out in June, and that's going to change the frequency of a number of our bus routes and the coverage of some of our routes. So there you will see in the next couple months some changes in signage or signs that are going to be tarped for when we actually roll out the system redesign. That's going to be with our June service changes. So there is going to be some things going on in the next couple months. And hopefully by the time we roll that out, there'll be more people riding as more people get vaccinated and a few more things open up. And that'll give us an opportunity to really address, you know, how, you know, locations that need shelters or locations that need improvements.
Thanks, Mike. That's a good answer. So for those people who are concerned about shelters in their community, please reach out to the Greater Cleveland Region Transit Authority. They have a process and a plan, and they need to know that you all want a shelter in your community. That is something that we in the state legislature don't control. We allow the local communities to determine where those shelters go, but it's good to have that question. We are at our time right now, so I want to find out from my assistant, Kayla, whether or not there is a question in the chat that we did not get to. If there is, we can possibly take one or two. Before Kayla, I guess, gets on the line, I want to just again thank you, Mike, and thank you for coming down here yesterday or last week to testify about the needs for our region. It's very important. We have one of the biggest regions in the state. I want to thank you, Senator Antonio, for your comments and being on this call as the ranking Democrat on the Transportation Committee, and Jessica Wallace, to you for sharing your story with us. That means so much. We've had a lot of people on the chat who have weighed in, those people like Reverend Butts and others who have shared their stories and asked questions. So I want to thank all of you for joining us. And Kayla, have you looked to see whether or not we have any questions from Facebook Live or from the chat that Nickie and I may have missed?
And Sandra, while she's looking, I did see one question. So and both of our phone numbers for our offices are in the chat for folks as well. Mitzi's been asking a question about, you know, how are we asking employers to lobby for more public transit? And frankly, while we talk to the Chamber of Commerce and some of the other organizations, I think actually the people have a lot of the power to really push businesses. If there's a business that you know that is not connecting with RTA maybe, because they will work with some of the businesses. I think hearing from folks in the Northeast Ohio area, letting them know that they want to see that is very, very helpful. We can talk as legislators, we can certainly, we voice our support for public transit. We connect the dots on how important it is for people to, like Jessica told us, to be able to get to their jobs and to enjoy independence. But the more folks that they hear from, I think the better it is as well. We certainly send that message out there, but folks who feel very strongly about this can help us advocate for sure, because it takes all of us really working together in order to improve this. So thanks for that question. And Mitzi, I appreciate your advocacy on a number of issues. So thanks for asking that one. Thanks.
And I think a perfect example of that, I had an advocacy group come in, and they were trying to figure out ways that they could address some of the challenges that employees have in getting to work. So what they did was go to some of the job hubs in Solon, Twinsburg, and many other parts of our region. And they just asked a simple question: how do most of your workers get to work? And the answer they got from almost everybody was, I don't know. I have no idea how they get to work, because they never thought about it. And you know, you apply online, you don't have to drive out to apply like you used to back in the day. So most people didn't even know that this was an issue for some of the workers. And again, when you talk about the number of buses that people, even in my family, have to take when their car breaks down, sometimes it's 2 and 3 buses to get to Twinsburg and Solon, depending on where you live and how early you have to be at work just to get to your job. And some people say, well, why don't they take an Uber? Well, if you take an Uber, you probably are doing away with 3 or 4 hours of the work you're about to do because of the amount of money it's going to cost. So you're right, Senator Antonio. It's about making sure employers know that there is a need, and working with the Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority, like Deputy General Manager Shipper has said. I wanted to give you your correct title and not just call you Mike. So thank you, Deputy General Manager, for that. I've been told that there is a question about looking at surrounding states, and I think Director or Deputy Director Shipper has talked about that. Indiana, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and what they're doing. And even in our own communities, our own state, Columbus and other parts of our region. So we can put a little bit more about that on our social media for those people who missed that. And with that being said, we wanted to close with what can you do next and what's next for the transportation budget. So we did that first. I am going to ask Senator Antonio, because we're 11 minutes over our time, to just say a couple of things. What's next for the transportation budget? When is it coming out of committee, and when does it have to be signed into law?
Well, it has to be done very soon. We plan on having it will be accomplished in the next 2 weeks. And so we're going to be getting a sub-bill. In fact, I have a call tonight at 9 o'clock with the chair of the committee to find out how many of our amendments were accepted and what the sub-bill is going to look like. And then we have one more opportunity to make some amendments, as you know, with an omnibus bill. And then we'll be ready to vote on that in the next, not this week, but at the end of next week. And then it will go back to the House for concurrence. We hope that everybody agrees on things that we've changed. If not, if there is an agreement, then it goes to a conference committee where we work out all the differences between the House and the Senate. And so my belief is right around the beginning of April, we will be done with that part of the budget. And then we will move on to the general operating budget, which is being worked on in the House right now.
All right, thank you for that. This budget by our Constitution has to be complete and signed by the governor by March 31st. So we are in fast pace here in the legislature. Secondly, how to advocate. We talked about that before. Listen, it's good to hear from the experts, the people who do this for a living, but we need to hear from people like you. We love that you put your information in the chat, but we'd also like you to send those letters down to the legislature so that our members can read and hear from you about what the need is for transportation as well as infrastructure. If you're sick of those raggedy roads in your communities and you want something to be done, well, this is where it gets done. If you don't like the fact that you can drive down 131st and the street looks like or used to look bad, or on some of the freeways, well, this is where it all happens. These are your tax dollars. So we need you to send us an email, to send us a letter, and let your voice be heard. If we don't hear from you, then we're going to go with the information that those people who have been advocating have been giving us. So we need to hear from you. You can contact our chair at Kunze, Kunze, at ohiosenate.gov. Send her information. She will give that to every member of the legislature and the Senate that needs it, as well as the Transportation Committee. You can send it to Williams, that's me, at ohiosenate.gov, and you can send it to Antonio at ohiosenate.gov. We will get it to the right place. So with that being said, I want to thank all of you again. Greater Cleveland Regional Transit Authority, Deputy General Manager Shipper, CEO Birdsong, Jessica Wallace, Senator Nickie Antonio, and me. I am State Senator Sandra Williams. We appreciate the opportunity to serve you, and we look forward to giving you more information about the operating budget, which is another $73 billion budget that impacts you. So with that, thank you all very much and good night.